This is part 17 of Angular 2 tutorial. In this video, we'll discuss why and how to use trackBy with ngFor directive, how to get the index of an item in a collection, identifying the first and the last elements in a collection, and similarly identifying even and odd elements in a collection. So first, let's see why and how to use trackBy with ngFor directive. ngFor directive is typically used to iterate over a list of items. If that list is small, then we are okay if we don't use trackBy. With large lists, ngFor directive may perform poorly. A small change to the list, like adding a new element or removing an existing element, may trigger a cascade of DOM manipulations and may lead to performance issues. Let's look at an example. This is the same project that we worked with in our previous video. I'm going to make a few changes to this employeeList component class. First of all, I'm going to have our employees property declaration right here, and then move this code into the constructor. To create a constructor, we use the keyword constructor, and let's close the constructor right here. And since we already have this property declared, I'm going to use this keyword. So this dot employees equals the list of employee objects that we have. I'm going to include a method as well in this employee list component class. Let's call the method getEmployees. This method is not going to return anything, so I'm going to set the return type to void, and all this method is going to do is set the employees property to an array of employee objects. And if you look at this collection right here, the first 4 employee objects are the same objects that we have right here. In addition to those 4 objects, it's adding a 5th employee object. And then within the view template, I'm going to include a break element and a button element. Let's bind to the click event of the button. So when we click the button, we want to call this method getEmployees. The text on the button is refresh employees. So with all these changes in place, let's run our project by pressing Ctrl F5. Notice on the initial page load, we have the 4 employee objects that we have within our constructor. When we click this refresh employees button, we are calling this getEmployees method. This method is returning a 5th employee object as well. So when we click the button, notice we see the 5th employee object. Now when we click refresh employees button, notice it appears as if nothing is happening, but behind the scenes, Angular is tearing down all these tr and their respective td elements and recreating them every time we click this refresh employees button. To confirm this, let's launch Browser Developer Tools, click on the Elements tab, and then expand My App, List Employee, Table, and T-Body. Underneath T-Body, we have all the tr elements. Now, let's click this refresh employees button and see what happens. Notice every time we click this refresh employees button, the color of these tr elements is briefly changing, indicating that all those tr and td elements are being teared down and recreated every time we click this button. That's because by default, Angular keeps track of these employee objects using their object references, and when we click the button, we are returning new object references. So Angular does not know whether it is dealing with the same list of employee objects or a different list of employee objects. That's why it is tearing down and recreating all the respective tr and td elements. This is a small list, so we don't notice any performance issues, but if it's a large list, we may have performance issues. So to avoid this, we can use trackBy with ngFor directive. So within our component class, I'm going to include another method. I'm going to call this method trackBy employee code. So we are going to use this method to track the employee objects, and we are going to track the employee objects using their employee code instead of their object references. And this method is going to take in two parameters: the index of the employee object that we are iterating over. Index is a number, so let's set the data type as number. And then the second parameter is the employee object itself. We don't have a type for the employee object, so I'm going to set the type as any. And we want to be able to track using the employee code. And if you look at employee code, it's a string, so this method is going to return string. And all this method is going to do is return employee code. And we're going to use this function to track our employee objects. So within the view template, wherever we are using our ngFor directive, I'm going to specify a semicolon and use this property, trackBy. We want to track by this function which returns employee code. So basically with this change, we told Angular to track employee objects by using their employee code and not their object references. So let's save all these changes and reload our web page. Now notice on the initial page load we have our 4 employee objects. Let's expand my app, list employee, table, tbody, and let's look at those 4 tr elements. Now look at this. When I click this refresh employees button the first time, the color of these 4 tr elements will not change. Only the color of the new tr element that is going to be added, will be briefly highlighted, indicating that that's the only DOM element that is added. So look at this. When I click refresh employees, look at that, only that changed, and that happens only the first time. And next time when we click refresh employees, look at that, the color of these tr elements does not change, indicating that there is no change made to these DOM elements, because now Angular is keeping track of these employee objects using their employee code. And every time we click this refresh employees button, we are returning the same employee codes. So they didn't change. So though we are returning different object references, because we have the same employee codes and they didn't change, Angular knows the objects did not change, and hence it didn't tear down and recreate the tr and td elements. So using trackBy with ngFor when you have large lists may improve the performance of your application. Here is that same code which we just discussed. Now let's see how to get the index of an item in a collection. So here is what we want to do. We want to display the index of every employee item that we have in this table in another column right here. So let's do the required changes. So first, within the view template, let's include another th element here. And we want to display the index of the item as well. And we are going to include another td element here and interpolation expression. And here on the ngFor, I'm going to use let keyword to create a variable. I'm going to call it I equals, and then I will use the index property of our ngFor directive. So that's going to return the index of every employee object that we are iterating over. And then we are going to use this variable I to retrieve the index. So within the interpolation here, we're going to specify that letter I, which contains the index of the employee object that we are iterating over. So let's save our changes and reload this web page. Notice now we see the index of the employee objects. Here is that same code which we just discussed. Now let's see how to identify the first and last elements in a collection. So let's flip back to Visual Studio. Now I'm going to create another variable here. So let's use another let keyword, and I'm going to call the variable is first equals, and I'm going to use the first property of ngFor directive. Similarly, I'm going to use another let keyword, and I'm going to use this variable here is last equals, and let's use the last property of our ngFor directive. So within these variables is first and is last, we will have true or false, indicating whether if the employee object that we are iterating over is first or last element. And let's include two td elements here, and let's display the value that we have in isFirst variable, and let's do the same thing with isLast variable. And we need to include two th elements, isFirst and another th element for last. Let's save all these changes and reload our web page. Notice we see the first and last elements, and here is that code which we just discussed. Finally, let's see how to identify even and odd elements in a collection. The idea is same. I'm going to use two more let keywords. So let is even equals, as you might have guessed, we have even property of the ngFor directive that we are going to make use of. Similarly, let's use let again, is odd equals odd property of the ngFor directive. And then within the table, let's include two more td elements. So within the first td elements, let's display the value that we have in isEven property, and in the other td, let's include the value we have in isOdd property. And finally, let's include two more th elements, isEven and another th element for isOdd. Let's save our changes and reload our web page. Notice there is true for all even elements, and in this column we have true for all odd elements. And here is that same code. Thank you for listening and have a great day.